We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And we're back with Liberty Nation's chief political correspondent, Graham Noble. Now, earlier in the show, we were talking the generalities of free speech, the First Amendment in the United States. But now I'd like to dive a little bit more into specifics, Graham. Now, I've got a clip for you to listen to. So if you could just take a quick listen to this. Listeners, you tune in your ears as well. This is Robert F. Kennedy Jr., presidential candidate, independent, speaking with CNN.
But do you really believe that when people talk about the threat to democracy that Trump poses, do you really think that that is an equal evil to Biden?
I mean, listen, I can make the argument that President Biden is a much worse threat to democracy. And the reason for that is President Biden is the first candidate in history, the first president in history that has used the federal agencies to censor political speech, so to censor his opponent. I can say that because I just won a case in the Federal Court of Appeals and now before the Supreme Court that shows that he started censoring not just me. 37 hours after he took the oath of office, he was censoring me. No president in the country has ever done that. The greatest threat to democracy is not somebody who questions election returns, but a president of the United States who used the power of his office to force the social media companies, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, to open a portal and give access to that portal to the FBI, to the CIA, to the IRS, to CISA, to NIH, to censor his political critics. President Biden, for the first president in history, to use his power over the Secret Service to deny Secret Service protection to one of his political opponents for political reasons. He's weaponizing the federal agencies. Those are really critical threats to democracy.
What do you make of that, Graham?
Interesting. I'm surprised that I'm almost surprised the CNN host didn't just cut his mic there and then as soon as he suggested that Joe Biden was actually a bigger threat to democracy than Trump. I must say I do agree with that. I mean, okay, so Trump he doesn't talk about it so much anymore, which maybe is a blessing because, quite frankly, I think everyone was getting a little tired of hearing about 2020. Whether or not you really believe that election the result was fixed or not. There comes a point where it's like, we can't continue there's no point in continuing.
Eyes have got to go forward, not backwards, right?
It's not going to make, at this point, the result of that election will never be reversed. But, how much of a threat to democracy is it really to suggest that an election was rigged? For a start, there are plenty of people on the other side. There are plenty of Democrats who have complained about supposedly rigged elections.
Hillary Clinton, for one.
Yeah, Hillary Clinton,
Stacey
for one.
Abrams.
Stacey Abrams. And of course, there are still people who go back to the Bush-Gore election
Florida.
and still insist that George W. Bush stole that election from Al Gore, So, but does it really threaten our democracy to question the outcome of elections? I would suggest that the moment we say you are not allowed to question the result of an election, you no longer have democracy. I mean, to me, it's an integral part of democracy to be able to actually question whether or not an election was fairly conducted.
Well, not only that, Graham, I think that this rises to everything, and this very much ties in with Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s position on COVID-19. The second that a government decides to shut down or try and limit what you can ask about, well, then that's a problem. That's an infringement, clearly, of the First Amendment. But not only that, it shows an overwhelming disdain for the idea that all ideas, no matter how unpleasant, no matter how reactionary, no matter how vile in some cases, should be disinfected by sunlight. Ideas should be out there, because otherwise what happens? You end up with people in, strange people in basements plotting revenge for nobody listening to them. And that, it creates a powder keg environment.
Yeah. I mean, the entire founding idea of democracy is that you have a government which is accountable to the people who elected that government. The people elected the leaders, and therefore the leaders are accountable to the people. And the moment that any government says, well, you're not allowed to say this, you're not allowed to say that, you're not allowed to question our motives when we, enacted this policy, or we put this into law, you're not allowed to question our motives. Well, then, okay, so the government therefore is no longer accountable to the people. And right there, you've just demolished the founding principle of democracy.
Yeah, now let's talk about that. A lot of people, especially this election, it's like, democracy is on the line. Nobody mentions that it's a constitutional republic, of course.
Yeah, right.
But putting that aside for a moment, there's this idea that it's a battle for the soul of the nation. Now, Graham, you and I were discussing very recently, and with our editor-in-chief, we were discussing a piece from the New York Times that compared Donald Trump to claiming that Donald Trump is trying to appear messianic to his followers, the Church of Trump. And the author in that New York Times piece, he specifically said that Donald Trump is making this case that it's a battle for the soul of the nation. And that phrase stuck in my head when I read it. And I did a bit of digging, and of course, Donald Trump actually very rarely talks about the soul of the nation compared to Mr. Joe Biden, Mr. former Vice President, now President Joe Biden. And in fact, there's a very specific speech called The Battle for the Soul of the Nation that took place, I believe it was early September 2022, just before the midterms, in Philadelphia, in front of Independence Hall, with I'm sure everybody who's seen this remembers this. It was this blood red backdrop.
Yes.
And it was the most divisive and partisan speech. Bear in mind, he also had 2 U.S. Marines in uniform flanking him on that, which was highly inappropriate for the type of event it was. And that speech was called the Battle for the Soul of the Nation speech. And it was a theme that was repeated again and again and again. And so they're putting this whole idea forward that everything is on the line in this election. And now Donald Trump has, in fairness, he has also said everything is on the line in this election. But it's not about elections. It's about what you do every day that really matters, because an election is just one day. It's what's happening every time that say, no, you can't post about that. You can't write about that. You can't speak about that. And that's happening on college campuses. You can't have somebody come and speak if they're going to put this kind of view out. You can't use this term because somebody yesterday decided it was an unpleasant term, or it might trigger somebody. And it's almost as though the First Amendment is under the threat of death by 1,000 cuts. Graham, your thoughts on that?
Oh yeah, it is certainly. There's no question about it, and of course the college campuses are we all know. I'm not saying anything that anyone doesn't already realize. These college campuses are they are the kind of front line, if you like, in the war on free speech, and we've gotten to the point now where these colleges no longer even pretend that they are it's not so much about the First Amendment, because the First Amendment specifically forbids the government from infringing upon your free speech, but these colleges they're now openly restricting free speech, and again the argument is they've turned the argument on its head, and rather than trying to deny that they're restricting anyone free speech, they're saying, no, we are going to prevent you from saying things which are triggering or hateful or in some way biased against somebody. And so they've kind of made themselves out to be like, oh, we're the good guys. Yes, we are infringing upon your right to free speech, but we're doing it in the name of, it's the old saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. That's the situation we're at.
College campuses, the vanguard of censorship. Graham J. Noble, thanks ever so much for joining us.
Sure.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Don't get caught up in the media madness. Join our movement for free thinking and free speech at libertynation.com. Publishing news and analysis 24/7 with original articles by our team of authors who tell it like it is. Join us each week for online TV shows, The Uprising Podcast, and Liberty Nation Radio. We believe in free thinking and free speech. We are LibertyNation.com.